Hey everybody, it's Patty, and I'm back with my trusty iPad, notebook, and Apple Pencil to show you my most recent project, which is this skirt, which I'm calling the shower curtain skirt. So I'm going to get into this in just a minute, show you some of the ways that I styled it, the inspiration, and most importantly, how I planned this out, because it was completely self-drafted, and it was made from a shower curtain that I got at a thrift shop with almost zero waste. There was just a few little tiny scraps left. So before we get into it, I'm Patty. I love to sew and make things and grow things, but mostly lately I like to sew. And I have been sharing my projects and getting into the details a little bit here on YouTube using my notebook, because I love to make notes and I like to talk about my projects. So if you enjoy this, thanks for joining me, and you go ahead and subscribe, click like, leave a comment, all those things. I love to get feedback. So let's get started on this skirt. I shared on Instagram the other day, yesterday I think, this yellow gingham Hinterland dress from, the pattern is from Sew Liberated, and I had gotten, this is made from a sheet that I got in the domestics bin at Goodwill for $1. It's 100% cotton, and I loved it, and I decided to make it into, well, I was pretty sure I was going to make it into a Hinterlands dress, but while I was out thrifting, I wanted to find something else, another piece of fabric to make something to wear with this dress, because I love layers and I don't have a lot of yellow in my closet, so I wanted to add something. So I got this shower curtain, and it also is 100% cotton. You can see the pattern a little bit better in this picture, and it has these really cute birds and yellow flowers and sort of, I just love it. I think it's so pretty. In fact, my husband and I were kind of like, oh, maybe we should put it in the bathroom and use it as a shower curtain, but I decided to make something from it. So this is self-drafted, although it's based on a couple of inspiration pieces, which I'll show you in a second. Before I really get into talking about all of that, I wanted to just show you how I will wear it. So I'm actually wearing this outfit right now as we speak. That's what I wore today. But it looks awesome with the yellow dress. So the yellow Hinterland dress, it's made from 100% cotton percale. I don't know how to say that word. So it's a little bit more stiff, and I like to hike up the skirt of dresses so I can wear something cool underneath. A lot of times I will do that by putting ties in the side seams so I can tie up the sides, or even tying the skirt in a knot. But this fabric's a little bit stiff, and I didn't think any of my normal methods would work, so I put in a casing. So it's just like that with seam down the middle with some ties, so I could hike up the skirt using the casing. And I think that the way that I designed the skirt, most of the fun folds and ruffles are kind of right here around this button placket. And so it sort of is centered right where the hike is, and it has, I just love the way that looks. I also really love it with this Metamorphic dress that I already had made. I think the colors are super pretty together, and I love the fullness of the skirt with the sort of free-flowing Metamorphic shape. And it's even cute with the shirt because, and we'll talk about this in just a second, but like I said, most of the details are up here in the front. So my other skirts that I have that are really full and ruffly, I feel a little bit princessy in them. And I like that this is a little bit more simple feeling around the back of the skirt. In fact, I can show you a little video so you can kind of see how it's shaped. See, it's more simple in the back, and a lot of the fun is in the front. So I like that. It's a cool design detail, but it's not all froof, which I love fluffy skirts, but for this project, I just really love this. So here I have some close-ups a little bit, and I'm going to show you the inspiration in just a second, but this skirt is a basic elastic band, so the waistband's up here, and then there is a upper panel, which is just a big long rectangle that's kind of gathered into the elastic band. And then there's this lower panel, which is a little bit longer. I'm going to change the color so we can see this better. So that's a little bit longer, the lower panel, and it's also shaped differently. So the skirt overall is 30 inches long. The upper panel is about 12 inches, the lower panel is about 20 inches, and then the seam allowances, this includes the seam allowances. And in the back, I wanted the overall skirt to be about 30 inches long because I know that's a good length for me. And I knew I wanted to have all these pickups and ruching and ruffling there, so I would need extra length to accomplish that. Otherwise, it would, show off my knees more than I wanted it to. So the actual piece of fabric that this is made from is shaped kind of like this. And I have a diagram I'm going to show you so you can copy this if you want to. But if you can envision this, this is the back, center back, more or less. And then this is the side back. And then in the front, this long piece is right here where the placket is, and all the pickups are along here, which were enough to make everything have a pretty even hem. So that's how it's constructed. Here's a close-up of this. The button placket is kind of fun because it is made from, imagine this is the shower curtain. The top band up here on this shower curtain had buttonholes to put the hooks into, and I cut that off to use as a design element, and then I turned it into this button placket, so that's kind of fun. And then the other thing I want to point out here, well, there's two things. First, the shower curtain is about 70 by 70 inches, right? And I needed an 80-inch wide rectangle for up here and 100 inches here. So I needed to piece those things because my fabric wasn't 80 and 70 inches or 100 inches wide. It was only 70. So here you can see right here and right here are where I pieced the upper panels. And I tried to use the existing hems as much as possible. So when we look at this, I overlapped, this piece of fabric has a raw edge that's overlapped and kind of lined up with this existing seam line. And then this was the existing hem. So I overlapped those, and then I sewed the this fabric to this fabric using a zigzag stitch there, right on the edge of the raw fabric from this side, and a zigzag stitch here. So I did a lot of overlapping and zigzagging and kind of a little bit more of a utilitarian sewing style. I didn't worry about this seam actually is a proper seam where I put the fabric right sides together and sewed it, but not all the seams are like that. And the reason I did that is because it was two raw edges, but where there was already a finished hem edge, I tried to use that. So let's take a look at the inspiration pieces. So when I decided I wanted to make this skirt to match the gingham dress, I thought of making a lantern skirt, which is this style of skirt that has the shape that's sort of like that, and a bound hem. I bind my hems with elastic. I have a lot of these skirts. I like them a lot. I almost made one, but I'm a little bored with that, and I wanted to play with some different design elements that I've been thinking about lately, like the ruffling and the folding. And it just wasn't working with this style of skirt, and really I wanted to do something a little bit different. So I thought of this skirt, which is the Patricia skirt from Sew Tina Givens, and I made this skirt 4 or 5 years ago. And this skirt has the upper panel, the lower panel that's wider, so it's kind of gathered into the upper panel. This one has a bound hem. It has a turned over elastic waistband. It's a pretty basic skirt. So I remembered that pattern. I didn't pull it out. I just kind of drafted this as I went along. But that was where the shape of the skirt, the idea came from. And then the other thing that I've been thinking about lately is this is the Croissant shirt from Krista Larson. And she does a lot of these designs that have folds and button plackets. And I've been kind of studying her designs, wondering how she does this. If she sews a regular shirt and then puts in all the buttonholes and then does the shaping, or if she does the shaping, then she puts in the buttonholes after the shaping is all in. So that's just kind of been on my mind lately. I don't even know if I really like this style of the shirt that much. It's a little bit intense for me, but those two thoughts are really where the inspiration came from for this skirt. And you can kind of see, with the shape, it has the Patricia vibe, the folds, it has that Krista Larson vibe. So you can see where my inspiration came from. So now we're going to come to the mechanics of this and how I actually drafted this. And I'm going to blow up the screen here. So if you want to take a screenshot, this over here shows the actual diagram that's close to how I cut the fabric. It's not perfect because I drew it after the fact from memory, but it's close. So if you want to take a screenshot of that, that'll give you a reference. And then over here, if you want to take a screenshot of these two diagrams, this shows my personal measurements, so you can compare my measurements with the measurements of the skirt I made and adjust them if you have different measurements. This shows the actual measurements of the skirt that I made, again, so you can compare. And then these two pictures show both the lantern skirt. So this skirt right here, this is what the pattern pieces look like up here. And then the new skirt, this is what the pattern pieces look like there. So I'm going to, again, put this, so if you want to take a screenshot, you can do that for reference. Okay, so let's get into this. So the reason I included the lantern skirt is because this is a style that I've been making a lot, and it is made based on measurements, not using pattern pieces. So I'm familiar with the numbers that are involved with both my measurements and with this skirt to give me the fit I like. So there's enough ease around the hips and in the waist and the length and all that. So first let's talk about my measurements and the measurements of the lantern skirt. So I have a 42-inch high waist measurement. So my narrowest part, which is right around there, that's 42 inches. That's where I often wear the waistband of my skirts, even though my natural waist is a couple inches lower and closer to 44 inches. And then my hips are 54 inches. So, and I am 5 feet 10 inches tall. And I know I like my skirts to be around 30 inches long, this length. I like my skirts a little bit long, so take that into account if you're working on this. Just both my height, and you can see how long these skirts are both about the same length. So this is the lantern skirt, and the lantern skirt is made from 2 trapezoids. So there's this one here, boop, 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 and then this one here, boop, 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 boop. And you actually, when you're cutting this, you cut out a rectangle that is your full width, which for me is 40 inches, and the height, which usually I go for 32 inches. If you're familiar with fabric, that you buy at the store, a lot of fabrics are sold in the 44-inch width. So, this isn't an exact science. And I totally, if I bought a fabric from a store that was 44 inches wide, I would use 44 inches, not 40, as my width. But my point is that when you're cutting out this lantern skirt, for me, I like to have 2 pieces of fabric that are 40 inches wide. So that's 80 inches total, because the front and the back. And just so you could kind of understand the mechanics, when you're doing the lantern skirt, when I make this skirt, I get the 2 pieces of fabric, 40 inches wide by 32, and you could see I'm gonna This is a little bit misleading. It's actually more like this because it's 40 inches by 32. And then you cut, so you cut out your rectangle, and this is the top of the skirt. You make a cut here. It's about 8 to 10 inches. And then you measure in about 5 inches. And then, right, so about 5 inches right there. And then you make a cut like this. And then you do the same over here. And then you do the same 5 inches or so this way. And then this is your pattern pieces that you end up with. So the reason I'm showing you all this is because this helps to figure out, it helped me to figure out how much fabric I needed and how much width I wanted. So the total overall width, this is a little bit misleading because it looks like a skirt, but the total width with front and back is 80 inches. And then because you do that 5-inch angle in, the total at the waist is 60 inches and the total at the hem is 60 inches. So there's a couple things that we can figure out from this. First of all, I like to have 80 inches of fabric to go around my hips, and I have 54-inch hips. That means that I'm happy having 26 inches of ease. Now, you can kind of extrapolate from this. If you're doing this and you don't really know how wide you want your skirt to be, but you kind of like the shape of mine, you can, as a starting point, this isn't like a formula you can always follow, but you can kind of see how these numbers relate to figure out your measurements if you wanted the same kind of loose fit on your skirt. So 26 inches is just about half of my hip. If you 26 times 2 is 52 inches, right? And I have 54. So let's say you have a 44-inch hip. So if you take half of that, 22 inches, add those together, that's going to be 66 inches. Instead of starting with 80 inches across, like I do, you might want to start with 66 inches and see if that's like the right width for you. For me, that would be way too tight because I like it a little bit looser, but that gives you an idea about where you could start if you're self-drafting a skirt and you want it to have this amount of ease. Now, there's one other thing I just want to point out really quick with these skirts. That is, you can see the fit on this one is a little bit more streamlined and this is a little bit more kind of baggy and loose. That's because if we compare the pattern pieces, the lantern skirt is this trapezoid shape, right? And the skirt that I made, I just went with a rectangle and gathered the top here. So that's why this skirt looks a little bit more streamlined through the hips than this one does. Both of these fits work. They're just a little bit different. So I knew some basics with my measurements because I understood the lantern skirt. So what I decided to do is I knew I wanted to have the tiered look like that Patricia skirt that we looked at, like this one right here. And I thought I would just use the rule of thirds to decide how long my tiers would be. And I know I like a 30-inch long skirt. So that means the top tier is about 10 inches and the bottom tier is about 20 inches. Now the rule of thirds, a lot of people are aware of this, but the rule of thirds is just that if you divide something into thirds, it creates a pleasing breakup of the space. So if you're framing a picture, if you're deciding proportions for a skirt, you can use the rule of thirds. So 2/3, 1/3. So I knew that I wanted my top panel to be 10 inches tall or so, and my bottom to be 20 inches or so. I intentionally decided to not work with this shaping like what the lantern skirt had. And I made, and this is kind of a good lesson, but I made my waistband for the shower curtain skirt 70 inches. In part, I did that because I thought I always made it 70 inches, but I actually always make it 60 inches. And that reminds me of one more thing I wanted to point out. I always use a 60-inch waistband with a piece of 36-inch elastic, which I have right here. And I overlap the elastic probably about 3 or 4 inches. And so and I have a 44-inch, well, 42 to 44-inch waist. So that kind of shows you how much elastic you might want. The length of your elastic has a lot to do with what kind of elastic you're using. Some elastic is much softer, and you kind of need to make it tighter so it feels more supported, and some elastic is more firm, and you need it a little bit longer, because if you make it too tight, it'll be too tight. So but for me, this is kind of the proportion I usually go for, and I buy elastic that is about 2 inches tall or thick. I like thick elastic, and I'll go over the waistband in just a second to tell you how I do the waistband. So back to picking the size and the cutting diagrams, I kind of thought, I had in my head that I always cut a 70-inch waistband. Also, the one thing I like about the way the lantern skirt is you take out some of this width. So you're really working with a 60-inch width, which is a little bit closer to my waist, so it's a little bit more of a smooth line. And the waistband and the top of the skirt are the same width, so they're very easy to attach. With this skirt, since I wasn't doing the shaping, I really did think I always did 70 inches for the waistband, but even if had I remembered it was 60, I probably would have gone a little bit bigger, because I didn't want to have to do too much gathering in of the waistband to the top of gathering the top of the skirt into the waistband. It probably wouldn't have been a big deal. I just kind of wanted to avoid that. So I cut one rectangle that, well, everything was pieced, which we're going to look at the diagram in a minute, but I cut enough to have one rectangle once I sewed them together that was 6 inches by 70 inches. And then for the top piece, this was 10 inches by 80 inches. And then the bottom piece, I wanted to be a little bit fuller than the top piece. So this needed to be bigger than 80 inches. Now, when you're talking about ruffles and fullness, you're really talking about ratio. So if you had, let's say the top piece was 100 inches, just because I want to do easy math, right? If you wanted a really full ruffle here, so it was really poofy and big, then you might cut the bottom piece to be 300 inches wide. So that's a 3-to-1 ratio. And that is a pretty full ruffle. I actually know, because I pay attention to this kind of thing, that I like a 1.5 ratio. So I would have loved to have my top piece be 80 inches, because that's the number based on my hips, and then the bottom piece to be 1.5 inches bigger, so that would have been 160 inches. No, that's 2 times 2. Sorry, I can't do math. That'd been 120, right? Whatever, 80 times 1.5. That probably would have been the fullness I wanted, but I didn't have the width for it, because we were working with a limited shower curtain, and there was very little waist. So I just did 100 inches. And if you look at this, you can see there's a little bit of gathering, but not really a lot. This ratio, which is less than 1.5, the 80 to 100, it's not a really full ruffle, but it totally worked, and I like the final product. I'm just saying that if I had had more fabric, I would have made the bottom piece wider. Now, for this bottom piece, it wasn't just 20 inches by 100 inches, because it wasn't just a rectangle. This right here, I'm going to change colors again. This right here is kind of what it was shaped like, but I had to do some piecing. So you know, we already went over this. So this is the center back, and then these are the sides that got gathered up here and here. So So that was what the list of what I wanted. So then let's move over and look at the shower curtain. So this shower curtain, I measured it when I started. I didn't measure it very well though, which kind of is why this diagram is not the best diagram. Because I measured it by folding it in half, both along and well, it's kind of a square. I folded it into fourths and then I measured it and multiplied everything by 2. And I don't think I measured it very well, so I wasn't working with super accurate measurements. But it was about 68 inches wide and it was about 66 inches tall, so pretty close to a square. So the first thing I did as I was cutting is I wanted to cut off that top piece that had all the buttonholes right along here. So I just cut that off the top. And that was about probably 4 to 6 inches of the height came off with that strip. So the next thing I did was I cut the top panel of the skirt, which is this part right here. Well, as much as I could. So I cut that 12 by 68. I knew I needed 12 by 80, but it was only 68 inches wide, so I cut what I could cut. Now the next thing I did is I knew that the bottom part of the skirt was going to be this funky shape. So I wanted to make my cutting easy, so I left that cutting for last. So the next thing I did was I knew that I was going to need to have a piece to go here to make this bottom piece wider than 68 inches. So I knew that would need to be 20 inches long because it was going to go in the center back, or 20 inches high more. So I measured 20 inches, and then I had done some math. So I decided to add 30 inches. So I cut this piece that was 20 by 30. And then when I spliced everything together, I ended up with one big long piece that was 30 inches wide here, and then 68 divided by 2, so 34 and 34, which comes out to 98 inches. So close to that 100 inches. So that's what that bottom piece looked like. Then I still needed a few more things. I needed the inset piece for the back, or I'm sorry, the top panel in the back. So that was this piece right here. That's what I cut next. So that was about 10 inches, maybe a little bit wider than that. This is, I made a plan and then I cut and I kind of was freewheeling. So it might not be exactly what I did, but it's pretty close. So that top back was about 12 by 10, and then I spliced together, and for some reason, I did actually cut this in half, the original piece that was 12 by 68, and then I added in that new piece in the middle. I don't know why I didn't just add it on in the end. Also, over here, I said 10 inches, 20, because I was just doing simple math, 30 inches in thirds. In real life, I cut that 12 inches tall because of seam allowances and stuff like that. So then I had the rest of this space here, and I cut that into 6-inch strips to piece together to make the waistband, which is right here. So that had me with everything cut, except for, and just to kind of do the math here to follow it through. So the fabric is 68 inches wide, 30 inches had gone to this, so I had 38 inches by 6, and I was going for 70. And then this math made these two strips 28 inches long each. So I used a full one, and then part of this one. I don't remember how much it was. Now we come to the bottom, and the with the bottom, I cut it so that we had the full 30 inches here, because that's how much height I had left. That's what determined how long this piece was, and 20 inches here, and that number was determined because I knew that I wanted my skirt overall to be 30 inches long, and the top was about 10 inches. So last measurement that I made was, if we think of the skirt pieces again, we have two pieces, front and back, kind of, that are 40 inches wide, right? So if you split that in half, then each side is 20 inches, right? And I knew I wanted this placket to be kind of in the center, although I've been wearing it off center, not right in the center. So the placket is over, like this over here I knew would be where the placket was. So I wanted the length to just be in the front. So this part here was just 20 inches, because 20 inches plus 20 inches gives me length for the front. And then I eased on up and I made this kind of cut like that to transition, because I didn't think if I just cut it like this, it would look very good. I wanted, when the gathering happened and everything got drawn up, I wanted it to be somewhat smooth. I planned on actually using my French curve to make this more of a shape like that, like more of a swoopy one. But then I just decided that I would freehand form the hem, that I would cut it, I would assemble the skirt, then I would do the pickups to get everything to be the right length, and then I would smooth out the hem as much as I needed to. I think I did kind of round these little corners along here just a little bit. Just I cut out everything with a rotary cutter, so maybe I swooped them a little bit, not a lot. But once I got everything all put together, the hemline looked really good with this kind of cut. So I didn't need to do a lot of adjusting to the hemline. So yeah, so this was the shape of this piece. It was 30 inches long, 20 inches in, 20 inches in. If you were in the previous example, when I said if you had a 44-inch waist, then you might use 66 inches as your width. Then instead of 20 inches there, you divide 66 by 2, so that's 33, front and back, 33 in the front, 33 in the back, and then divide that in half, so that'd be 15, 16, like 17, well, 16.5 inches. That's half of the front, on each side, so it'd be 16.5 if you were doing that smaller size. So that's how that math works. Then I cut here and I added in this panel that I cut there, so I had my nice long piece. And then came assembly. So to assemble the skirt, first of all, just the quick order of what I did was I did I assembled the waistband. Then I assembled the top panel and I put them together. Then I put the placket on the one edge, and you can't see it, but if we go over here, you can kind of see it. So one side was the placket. I get turned around with which actual side it was. So let's just say this was the placket side that I attached that button hole strip from the top to. The other side was already finished because this was a side hem, right? So I just overlapped them probably about this much. Sorry, my pen tip is really big. I overlapped them about this much and then I just stitched it. It was overlapped like probably 2 or 3 inches. So the buttonhole placket would lay over the other edge and I could put the buttons on there. I didn't want it side by side. They needed to be overlapped because that's how plackets work. And so I put together the waistband, put together the top panel, attached them. I did the overlapping with the placket, and then I had to do some gathering stitches along here. And I attached this to that. I also, because there was a difference in width between the waistband and the top panel, I did a couple tucks. I didn't actually run gathering stitches and gather. I just I split it into four. When I'm attaching things like this, they're always sewn together so they're in the round. And then I split it into 4 quarters, and then each quarter had 2 tucks that I just eyeballed. I didn't measure it or anything. So that this wider top edge would fit into the smaller waistband. And then I gathered and fit these two together. And then I finished the waistband. I actually probably finished, yeah, I finished the waistband. Oops, I shut the recording off and had to start over here. So I finished the waistband after as I was attaching it to the top panel. Real quickly, the way I do my waistbands is, so I cut the strip that's 6 inches by 70, right? And I'm just gonna make some space here. So here's the strip, 6 inches by 70. And then this is right side out. Right side, like you can read my writing. Then I fold under about a 1/2 inch there, and I press it. So this edge is folded. And I also, before I even do that, I attach, I sew it so it's a circle. This is if we're looking from the top. And then I fold under, so one side's pressed under. Then I've got this raw side, which I attach to the skirt, which is also sewn into a circle. And right sides together. And then you can flip this folded edge around so it's on the inside of the skirt, and you cover up the seam line, and then you can stitch in the ditch, and you stitch all the way around, just leave a couple inches open for the elastic. That gives you a fully finished on the inside waistband that looks really nice. And then the other thing to do, because I use thicker elastic, it's about 2 inches thick, and I like that because it has more of a structural feel. It looks a little bit more like a belt. You can kind of see it with this one, is you finish it with stitches. So for a 2-inch wide elastic waistband, I do a line of stitching about 5/8 inch from the top, and then 5/8 inch from the bottom. And to do that, I just extend my stitch length to 4 or 5 millimeters, whatever that unit of measure is. And you stretch out the elastic as you're stitching, so it's not stretchy, and the fabric will totally stretch out, and then you release it as soon as it's stretched, and it bounces back, and it gives you a really nice finished waistband look instead of if you don't do that, it can get really bunchy, and to me looks really homemade. So I like to finish the waist that way. So then the last step was I had the skirt, if you can envision it, it was like this, but the whole front was 30 inches long instead of 20 inches long. So the first thing I did is I folded up with a tape measure. I folded the placket. I made these folds, making sure the buttonholes were still accessible, so it was 20 inches long. Then I did the same with the strip underneath where the buttons are attached. I kind of folded them in the same place, so it was 20 inches long. And then I just hung the skirt on a hanger, a clippy hanger, and I hung it. I have a bookshelf I hang stuff on a lot while I'm working on them. And then I just started pinching, and I tried to, in some places, match, like right here you can see there's a fold. So I just took a fold of fabric right here. It's probably, most of the folds are probably about, 5 inches. So the full, total, so this is maybe 2.5 inches, if that makes sense. So I made those folds, and I stuck a pin in them. So if you were looking at this, the pin would be like, here, hold the fold. Here, hold the fold. Here, hold the fold. And then I kept doing that until it looked like, to my eyeballs, that the hemline was pretty straight. This picture, the camera is down on the ground, so it looks a little bit longer in the back than the front, but I think that's more angle. It looks pretty straight when you're looking straight on. So I kept till it looked pretty straight on the hanger. Then I tried it on. I had already done the waistband so I could wear it, and there was a couple more tucks I needed to take, and then I just went and sewed where the pins were. Each of these tucks, I probably sew about 4 inches back and forth a couple times with a straight stitch. So that's all it took. The last step was hemming. And I was thinking, I really didn't say, so 20, 40, 60. This middle part here was probably about 15 inches, maybe a little bit less, the straight part here, and then I just attached it with the angles. So I kind of folded it in half. I realized I told you what these measurements were, but I didn't really tell you what these were. But it doesn't really matter that much. It's just that I needed to get an angle here so that when everything was pulled up on the fronts, it kind of had more of a straight looking line in the back. And when we go and look at the picture from the back, you can see it is pretty straight. I mean, it really came together quite nicely. Once I got everything stitched into place, the last thing I had to do was hem it. And I was surprised. It worked really well. So if you remember, that back pattern piece was like this, right? And if you think of how the tablecloth was, because I cut this piece at the bottom of the tablecloth, this edge here and this 20 inches in and this 20 inches in and this edge, they were all already finished. Once everything was gathered up, it really was more of a straight line. There's a couple little like wavy bumps, nothing that extreme. But this section here needed to be hemmed, and it was very easy for me to just do a double. I turned it up about 1/4 of an inch, pressed it, turned it up about 1/4 of an inch, pressed it, and then top stitched it. It was a very easy thing to hem. I think probably in part because really you're working with fabric on the bias with this whole swoop here, so it was just really easy to hem. So that is it. That is how I made the skirt from a tablecloth. I love this. If you screenshotted it, if that's not proper English, but you can kind of use that as a guide to cut a similar skirt out of a tablecloth for you. If you have any questions, feel free to send me a note, or you can find me on Instagram. I am pretty good about responding to messages on Instagram. It's Patty Brower. And you can just send me a DM if you have any questions. And thanks for listening. I hope this was helpful.